The dusty camera was resting in the corner of the room, like a silent witness to everything he couldn't be. Rafael Soares, 38, had been called promise of Brazilian documentary cinema. Today, it was just another deleted name from the list of independent directors who tried and failed. He lived in a small apartment in Belo Horizonte, between overdue accounts, never filmed itineraries, and festivals memories that applauded him years ago, when there was still shine in his gaze. The phone hadn't touched weeks. The emails, when they arrived, were just automatic charges or newsletters he had never asked for. The money was over, and with it, faith. The pandemic had taken him the few remaining contracts, and the demolishing critique of his latest movie, an ambitious and confusing project on urban peripheries, had sealed his destination on the circuit. There was an old camera, a computer that crashed, and a name that no one else seemed to remember. That muffled morning on Tuesday, Rafael stared at the cracked ceiling, reflecting on what he would do with the rest of his life. The feeling of being invisible corroded his soul. He was not exactly unhappy, but insensitive, as if he had left his own existence. The only thing that was still pulsating in his chest was an almost instinctive desire to tell something that was true. But where to find truth when it is surrounded by failures? It was then that, in an unpretentious conversation with an old college colleague, the mention of a rural auction in the interior of Minas Gerais came. A forgotten place where worthless animals were sold at symbolic prices. The word symbolic lit something in Rafael. He didn't know exactly why, but he felt that perhaps there, in the abandonment of other beings, there was a mirror. He took his camera, carried the batteries, and left, without script, without direction, only with a burning intuition that something needed to be counted. The dirt road seemed to drag itself under the tires of Rafael's old car, which ranges as if he was tired of trying. While driving, his mind returned to the accumulated slips on the room table. Water, electricity, rent, and a bank's final warning. If you didn't pay the car debt until the end of the month, your name would be negative. But deep down, he had been negative for a long time, by industry, his colleagues, for himself. Failure is not enough at once, he settled slowly. At first it was a bad criticism, then a refusal of notice. Soon came the layoffs, the disappearance of contacts, and finally the silence. Such a dense silence that it seemed to fill all the spaces of the house. No connection, no invitation to show your movies, not even messages from acquaintances. Rafael had used to live as a ghost, haunting his own ancient dreams. In his youth, he dreamed of winning Cannes. I was convinced that cinema could transform the world, or at least itself. But reality was more cruel than any script. Producing was expensive, the edicts were bureaucratic traps, and people's attention was increasingly scattered between small screens and shallow videos. How to make someone watch a long, painful, and true story when everything needed to be fast, cheerful, and forgettable. He thought of giving up, yes, several times, but something prevented him, perhaps pride, perhaps anger. And now, in that meaningless trip to an obscure auction inside, something inside him whispered that the story he was looking for could not be in big cities or the trendy festivals, but there, in the midst of nowhere, where no one looks, where only silence responds. The auction was on the banks of a forgotten road, surrounded by dry hills and trees that seemed to have given up on. Rafael arrived at the scene shortly before noon, with the sun running down the back as sweat. An old shed, covered with rust and surrounded by dusty pickup trucks, housed men in hat and hard expression. The smell of wet straw, manure, and diesel took the air. It was the kind of place where no one would recognize him, and that comforted him. With the camera hanging on his shoulder, Rafael came in discreetly, like who didn't want to bother. There was no audience, no thrill bids. Most animals were sold out of necessity, bearing horses, exhausted cows, oxen that no longer served for slaughter. The monotonous voice of the auctioneer echoed through the cracked speakers, announcing each lot with a coldness that hurt more than any price. There, the animals had no names, just numbers and weight. It was between a blind heifer and a donkey of deformed paws that came up the bull. Large, stained, with a deep scar on the side of the neck, and an empty look. The auctioneer sighed before calling him. Lot 71. Taurus without registration. Last attempt. Minimum bid. 1 reel. Silence. A muffled laugh. One farmer whispered to another. This one should have become soap. Rafael Soares. It hit him in a way he could not explain. He raised his hand, almost by reflection. A reel, he said, but was corrected. It's $1, boy. He nodded. $1, then. The hammer fell. Some laughed, others swung their heads. Rafael didn't care. The bull looked toward him without curiosity, just tiredness. It was a rejected, dirty, defeated animal. And somehow Rafael saw in him the same reflection he saw in the mirror every morning. Transporting the bull to the small lease property Rafael had achieved near Brumadinho was a clumsy operation. The rented trailer was rusty, the car seemed not to stand the weight, and the animal didn't cooperate. The bull neither attacked nor reconnect, just refused to walk. His hooves sank to the earth as if he did not want to leave the ground where he was humiliated. It took 3 people and almost 2 hours to convince him to enter. During the way back, Rafael kept the camera pointed at the rearview mirror. The bull, immovable inside the trailer, looked like a broken monument. He filmed not by strategy, but on impulse. I wanted to record everything. The absurdity of it, the decay, the silence. That image, a bankrupt filmmaker pulling a discarded animal, was a perfect metaphor. Perhaps the beginning of something he still didn't understand. Arriving at the site, Rafael improvised a small surrounded wooden next to an empty shed. He gave the bull clean water and placed an old blanket on the beaten clay floor. It was little, almost nothing, but there was something in the way the animal looked at the environment, sniffing the air with suspicion, who remembered the look of someone who, for the first time in a long time, feels that it will not be hurt. Rafael spent hours watching the bull that night. It did not film. He just sat outside, listening to the sounds of the woods and the stuffy grunts of the animal. I still didn't know what name would give him. I didn't even know if the bull would survive that week. But one thing was certain. That was the purest investment I had ever made in life. Not for wanting return, but by wishing from the heart that that being was also entitled to a fresh start. The next day, at dawn, Rafael took the camera with him and stood before the surrounding, watching the bull. The morning light was still shy, filtering itself through the trees and gradually revealing the marks on the animal's body. Ancient scars, others still open. There were signs of chains around the neck, leg scratches, and a purulent injury near the left hip. That was not just a rejected animal. He was a survivor of some forgotten cruelty. Rafael turned on the camera, but did not film the suffering immediately. Instead, he approached slowly, without sudden movements. The bull watched him with a mixture of distrust and resignation. When he reached out, the animal did not move. It only lightly lowered its head, as if you accept everything that comes. Rafael walked away with a knot in his throat. He was used to capturing human pain, but there before him, there was a silent pain without language. That afternoon, it took a bucket of warm water and began to clean the wounds with clean cloth and care. Each time the cloth touched the injured meat, the bull shuddered but did not react with violence. It was as if I had already learned that pain was part of everyday life. Rafael spoke to him in a low voice, almost like a movie. You'll be fine. I promise I'm going to tell your story. For the first time, he felt that this promise was not artistic. It was personal. While taking care of the bull, Rafael began to record short videos. Nothing structured. The sound of the cloth, the breathing of the animal, the bucket being dragged on the floor. He had no idea what he would do with that yet. But I felt there was something there, an invisible wire that pulled him to a deeper place. Perhaps for the first time in years, he was connecting with something true, raw, unavoidable. And that is precisely what the cinema had failed to show. The place where Rafael had installed the bull was an ancient rural property that belonged to a deceased uncle. The place was decaying, but it still had a functional structure, a small wooden barn, a shallow well, and a makeshift warehouse that served as a deposit for old tools, moldy boards, and some cans of dry paint. It was there, in that warehouse forgotten by time, that Rafael set up his improvised edition island. He brought his old speaker, the slow computer, and a set of tangled cables. When electricity oscillated, he borrowed a portable generator of a friend. It was a makeshift scenario, even chaotic, but there was an energy in the air, a kind of silent expectation that kept him up late, reviewing the few recorded images, organizing ideas that were not yet formed, just emotion. Between one cut and another, Rafael began to observe the most subtle details of the bull. The way he always lay his back on the road, as if he wanted to protect himself from the world. The small sounds he made when he dreamed. Even the way I ate, slowly, as if it was no hurry to continue to exist. Rafael began to record these nuances, not with the intention of impacting, but to preserve. It was as if archiving the dignity of a being that everyone had forgotten. Gradually, the warehouse became more than a working space, became the heart of hope. There Rafael dreamed again, even if he didn't know what exactly. I felt I was gestating something bigger than him. It wasn't just about the bull. It was about everything that is discarded, about all that are forgotten. And perhaps, in every frame that saved it on the hard drive, it was also saving a piece of itself. Rafael's first recordings of the bull had no script or camera plan. They were raw taken, often shaken, natural light, and background sounds like the corner of the roosters or the rustle of the trees. But there was truth in that. Unlike anything you had already filmed, those images required no direction or performance. The bull pretended nothing. He only existed, and that was powerful. Rafael spent hours behind the lens, watching the animal's smallest gestures, the way he raised, how he took a deep breath before drinking water as he stared at the horizon for long minutes without moving. There was no hurry. Every second filmed seemed to carry the weight of a lifetime. For the first time, he understood that silence could also be narrative. That time, when respected, told stories more strongly than 1,000 words. He began to organize the videos in folders named carefully Look, Rest, Wounded, Rain, Fear. Each of them kept small fragments of something bigger, something they could not yet name. When reviewing the images, he realized that the bull changed subtly every day. A different blinking, a slower reaction to the touch, a shy approach. It was as if the animal was relearning to trust. And Rafael, too. It was in this process that he realized something essential. He was filming, yes, the bull, but he was also veiled, filming his own reconstruction. Each frame carried a hidden redemption. Each slow movement of the animal reflected its own resurgence journey. The camera, once an instrument of vanity and ego, had now become an extension of its listening. And in that rural and silent scenario, Rafael was finally beginning to tell a story that was worth told. Despite the small signs of progress, there were nights when the bull became. He walked in circles inside the surrounding, loudly resumed, and sometimes hit his head against the trunk of a tree as if he tried to expel something inside him. At these times, Rafael watched from afar with the camera off. It was not the time to register. It was time to respect the pain. These unrest accesses came without warning. They could last minutes or hours. In some of them, the bull dug holes on the floor with the front paws, throwing ground back with fury. He seemed to look for something he had lost, or somewhere where he could hide. Rafael, observing him, felt a tightness in his chest. It was impossible not to think of trauma. Those attitudes were not animal instinct. They were living memories, trying to break free. One morning, hearing a higher than normal migrated, Rafael ran out with a flashlight. He found the bull sweating, his eyes wide, his body tense like someone's in panic. He approached carefully and just stayed there, speaking softly, like a child. "It's okay, you're safe now." After long minutes, the bull stopped shaking. Rafael filmed nothing. At that moment, more than filmmaker, he was a caregiver. It was only the next day, when reviewing some old recordings, which realized a pattern. The outbreaks always happened when the sky was covered or when distant thunder announced storm. Perhaps, in the past, the worst violence had happened at these times. Maybe the sound of the rain was a trigger. Rafael noted this in his production book, not as technical data, but as proof that the animal, even wounded, still carried the memory of fear. And that, by itself, was the deepest raw material of any narrative. In the fourth week of living with the bull, Rafael felt that he needed to understand where he came from. He knew only the basics, that the animal had been sold in a rural auction as unusable, without record, without history. He decided to return to the place where he had bought it, not as a buyer this time, but as an investigator. It took the camera, now with clearer purpose, not only record the tourist journey, but the marks of the system that had discarded it. Arriving at the auction, Rafael was received with indifference. The same auctioneer the previous time barely recognized him. "Old bull? I think it came from a confinement farm that closed. It wouldn't last 2 weeks. You luck out of him not having died in the tow." The coldness of the answer did not surprise him, but lit a silent fury. Those who dealt with the animals seemed to have lost any remnants of emotional bond with them. There were numbers, cargo, weight, and profit. With some insistence, Rafael got the name of a former carrier who had worked on the farm for where the bull came from. He found the man, a simple, tired man who told what he knew. They called him Ghost. He never reacted to anything. He was silent. They tried to use it as a breeder, but they said it was temperamental and hurt the calves. But in the eyes of the old carrier, there was something more. He wasn't violent. He was just broken. Hearing these words, Rafael turned off the camera and was silent. Ghost! The name resonated inside him like an old whisper. On the way home, while the car was jerking over the dirt roads, Rafael no longer thought about frames or lines. He thought of dignity. I thought of how someone or something can be shaped by pain to the point of becoming unrecognizable, and decided the bull now had a name, Ghost, and he would have a voice. With the name Phantom defined, Rafael felt that something inside the narrative gained body. That anonymous animal once now had identity, and that changed everything. Decided to dive deeper. He gathered the videos, the interview audios with the keeper, and the images of the auction. He created a makeshift mural in the warehouse, where he organized dates, places, property names, and any details that could help rebuild the bull's past. The farm for which Ghost had come was an old confinement in the Minas Gerais Triangle, known for employing severe methods of containment and reproduction. There were records of allegations for abuse, but no in-depth investigation was done. The ownership archives had been lost with the owner's death, and the heirs sold everything quickly. Rafael found an amateur video on YouTube for years earlier showing the animals of confinement, and there was Ghost, younger, but with the same hollow eyes. That was a punch in the stomach. Seeing the bull in a tight enclosure between dozens of others, being pushed with shocks and sticks, made him turn off the video before the end. It took a deep breath that needed to enter the documentary, but not as an empty denunciation, but as a background of the journey. Ghost was not just a victim of a cruel farm. It was the result of a production logic that transforms living beings into gears. And Rafael knew. This was the true story I needed to tell. That night, he took the notebook to the surroundings and, for the first time, showed Ghost an image of himself in the past. Of course, the bull did not understand video, but there was something symbolic in that gesture. "You're no longer that," Rafael murmured. "You are more." Ghost just took a deep breath and lay slowly, as if resting on something old. And at that moment, Rafael understood. It was documenting the reconstruction not only of an animal, but of a symbol of silent resistance. The scars on the ghost body were evident, but the deeper marks were those that could not be seen. Rafael began to perceive them in the details, in the way the bull retreated when he heard footsteps behind him, as if waiting for aggression, in the subtle tremor of your skin when you feel the touch, even kind. It was as if each gesture kept a memory of pain, as if each movement had been shaped by fear. Rafael wrote down everything in his field notebook. It was meticulous. Not only recorded the animal's reactions, but also his own feelings in witnessing them. It has begun to understand that trauma leaves traces that do not disappear over time, just learn to hide. And that gave him an idea. The documentary would not just be about the bull. It would be about all beings marked by the invisible, human or not, who carry scars that the world ignores. On a cloudy afternoon, while cleaning one of the oldest ghost wounds, Rafael began to cry. It was a silent, contained cry, those who come out as a steam of the soul. I didn't know for sure why. Perhaps it was for the brutality of that. Perhaps it was because, when taking care of the other's pain, he was allowed to look at his own. He also carried invisible marks, rejections, failures, humiliations that pretended not to hurt anymore. Ghosts somehow forced him to face it all. From that day, Rafael started to include his own voice in the videos, not as a protagonist, but as a witness. He recorded reflections on off, small thoughts whispered during filming. Sometimes what is not seen is what weighs the most. He doesn't speak, but he answers me. These audios, combined with the dense silences of ghost images, created a poetic and painful layer in the material. The film was beginning to be born, not as a denunciation, but as a confession. It was not overnight, but there was a time when Rafael realized that he was no longer alone there. Ghost, still suspicious, began to follow him with his eyes. Then he began to approach when he arrived with water or food. One day, in the late afternoon, Rafael sat on the floor outside the surroundings, as he always did. Only this time the bull came to him slowly and lay close to the fence. No sound was changed, only the presence. And that was enough. It was a wordless friendship, built in the measure of time and mutual respect. Rafael required nothing from the bull. He did not expect spectacular reactions or try to humanize him. He just watched him, took care, and filmed him gently. In return, he received something precious, company. The feeling that even in silence, two broken beings could recognize themselves. This connection was gaining space in the documentary as an emotional line that united all images. During a recording, Rafael captured a magical moment. He stretched his hand slowly and ghostly, cautiously, leaned his muzzle in his fingers. The touch was brief, almost imperceptible, but was enough for Rafael to know that animal trusted him. It was the kind of scene that does not rehearse, that is not repeated. Watching that on the monitor, hours later, Rafael cried again, not of sadness, but gratitude. I knew that frame would be the soul of the movie. Over time, the days on the site gained another pace. The mornings came to be made of simple rituals. Ghost feed, clean the surrounded, organize the recordings. In the afternoon, Rafael edited, and at night wrote. There was a routine that, although lonely, brought peace. And in the midst of this raw and silent peace, a friendship flourished. There were no hugs, no words of affection, just respect. And that was more than Rafael had had in a long time. Rafael has always believed that art should provoke, transform, bleed when necessary. But I had never experienced the creation of something so intimate and at the same time as silent as that documentary. There were no sensational interviews, no epic trails, just naked images, long times and the pain of two beings, he and Ghost, trying to exist after abandonment. And, paradoxically, it was from this shared suffering that sprouted something beautiful. During the edition, Rafael realized that he did not need many effects. The videos spoke for themselves. The sound of the wind between the leaves, the drag of the hooves on the clay floor, the heavy breath of the bull by resting, all this made up an involuntary and poetic soundtrack. It was as if the environment itself told the story. Each frame seemed loaded with symbolism, even in the most banal moments. There was truth there, and truth is rare raw material in art. The creative process, this time, was not about impressing festivals or pleasing curators. It was about exorcised pain. With each scene mounted, Rafael felt that he's sewing a part of himself that had been torn years earlier, when criticism massacred his last work and the market closed the doors to his vision. Now, there was no market. There was no criticism. There was only one injured filmmaker filming an equally injured animal, and in that there was dignity. At the end of an intense editing week, Rafael gave play in a preliminary version of what he was beginning to call the ghost. Life after silence. It was 26 minutes of images almost without dialogues. Only presence, pain, and subtle overcoming. At the end, he stood in front of the black screen. He felt his chest open, vulnerable but full. Pain, born art, does not need shouts to be heard. Sometimes she speaks softly, and whoever listens never forgets. Rafael turned the warehouse into an editing sanctuary. The walls were lined with notes, cutting paintings, phrases he murmured and then transcribed carefully. Excerpts like, "He survived without knowing why," or "Pain also shapes beauty," served as emotional guides. With each new version of the documentary, more layers revealed themselves. He was not just writing a movie. He was sowing the ghost fate with his own life. He began to interspersing scenes from the bull with images of the auction, testimonials from the carrier, excerpts of old files from the farm where he had been tortured. But I didn't do it in a hurry or anger. I wanted the narrative to be built as a growing whisper, a feeling that matures in the viewer. Instead of scandalizing, he wanted to move. And that was a risk. I knew that without easy visual appeal, it could be ignored. But I would rather fail honestly than triumph with tricks. As he edited, Rafael listened to ghosts breathing outside. Sometimes he heard his heavy steps, sometimes a distant mute. It made him feel only less. The presence of the animal was constant, even when invisible. On many nights, I dreamed of the bull walking in open, free fields, as if both were looking for the same horizon. On the screen, his relationship turned into cinema. Outside it, it was redemption. Upon completion of the first finishable version of the movie, with 43 minutes exact, Rafael closed the video editor and cried in silence. It was not just the end of an artistic process. It was the end of a cycle of mourning. For the career that was not, for the promises that were not fulfilled, for everything that hurt and stayed. Now, with the movie in hand, he felt that he might be able to believe again, not in prizes, nor in fame, but in the power of the story of transforming, even one life at a time. The afternoon when Rafael watched the full movie for the first time, alone in the warehouse, decided to do something he had not been doing for years, projecting on a white wall, as in college, when the cinema was still a dream and not injured. He pulled an old canvas, stretched her against the rusty nails, and positioned a portable projector. He sat in a plastic chair with the camera off. It was no time to record anything. It was time to feel. When the image appeared, the ghost eyes dominated the screen. There was something ancestral in that large-scale look. It was impossible not to feel small before him. Over the course of 43 minutes, Rafael did not look away once. Each plane, every breath, every silence was a blow and a cure. As the movie advanced, something inside it broke. Tears began to fall slowly, as if washing years of frustration. It was not just sadness, it was a kind of recognition. Seeing herself reflected in that once rejected creature, Rafael understood that she had healed more than an animal. He had healed himself. That projection was, in the background, a mirror. Ghost, property on screen, was a witness and protagonist of a much larger reconstruction than any script would dare to plan. It was a gross life, and that's why it was art in the highest degree. When the screen darkened and the final credits climbed, Rafael remained silent. He didn't applaud, he didn't smile. He just took a deep breath. The movie was ready. But more than that, he was ready. Ready for the world to see, criticize, cry, or ignore. Whatever happened from now on, it didn't matter. Because at that moment, in the illuminated solitude of a warehouse in the interior of Minas Gerais, Rafael had regained the right to feel proud of himself. It was night when Rafael decided to send the movie to the internet. The connection on the site was slow and unstable, which made everything even more symbolic. He needed to wait, have patience, trust the invisible. Created a new account on a free video platform. No producer logo without release ads. In the title field, he typed, "Ghost, Life After Silence." And in the description, just one sentence, "Sometimes you need to hear what you don't say." While the file was transferred, he watched the progress bar as a delicate surgery. Each advanced percentage was one step out of the cave where it was locked for so long. When finally the publish button appeared, he hesitated for a second. The classic doubt. What if no one watches? But soon it took a deep breath and clicked. Not because she expected applause, but because she felt she owed it to her own ghost. He needed to be seen. That same night, Rafael didn't sleep. He lay on the porch, near the surrounding, and watched the stars. Ghosts snore low, lying on the straw, serene. There was something comforting in that sound. It was as if to say, "You did your part." The silence of the dawn was deep, but this time it didn't seem empty. It was the silence of something that was about to happen. The silence that precedes the impact of a true story finding the world. At dawn, Rafael checked the video. It had 7 views, then 15, then 40-2. Timid comments started to emerge. I couldn't stop crying. "Thank you for showing this to the world. This movie changed me." He didn't know yet, but at that moment, Phantom was beginning to stop being just a documentary. It was becoming a movement. And like every movement that is born of pain, it had something deeply human and inevitably transforming. In less than a week, what started with a few dozen views has become thousands. The algorithm, hungry for real and moving stories, captured Ghost and launched him to audiences that Rafael had never dreamed of reaching. Influencers began to share excerpts from the documentary with emotional subtitles. Activists, movie buff, and even teachers used the video in discussions about animal ethics, art, and empathy. The comments exploded. From all over Brazil, and even from other countries, messages from people plagued by the ghost journey. Many saw in the bull the representation of their own trauma. "This animal is me," when they discarded me from the company where I worked 20 years. My mother cried remembering her dog, which was abandoned. This movie made me want to live again. It was as if the bull's silence spoke directly to the souls of the people. Rafael, astonished, spent hours reading every comment. It was not vanity. It was an amaze. He never imagined that the intimate pain he had shared could echo so collectively. He received invitations for interviews, proposals for independent festivals, and messages from filmmakers who, like him, were on the edge of the creative abyss. Everything seemed surreal, and at the same time, deeply real, because nothing had been done with pretense. The truth, after all, has a power that no marketing manufactures. While the world discovered Ghost, the bull continued its simple routine. He ate slowly, slept in silence, and watched Rafael with the same quiet look as the worst, and yet chose to trust. And perhaps that was exactly what the public saw. Not an exotic animal, not a miraculous production, but the beauty of survival. The silent courage of those who, even broken, remained standing. The video reached 1 million views in 12 days. News sites began publishing articles with titles such as "The Documentary That Thrilled Brazil" and "The Story of a Rejected Bull That Is Turning Lives." The turn had started, and with her, an avalanche of unexpected consequences. Cinema agents wanted to buy the rights. Producers suggested dramatized versions. There were invitations for exhibitions in cultural spaces, and even a European festival contacted asking for registration. Rafael refused the first offers calmly. "I didn't want to turn Ghost into a product. Not yet." Before, he needed to ensure that the essence of the story was respected. His biggest fear was to see the narrative diluted in empty advertising campaigns or reunited with actors for rapid consumption. He talked to jurists, experienced filmmakers, and activists. He found that for the first time, there was something in his hands that was worth more than money: integrity. It was at this moment that he decided to create an official website for the project. There, in addition to the documentary, he provided behind the scenes excerpts, reflection texts, and a direct channel for schools and institutions that wanted to use the film as an educational tool. In a few days, requests from NGOs, university professors, and psychologists interested in the sensitive approach to trauma have emerged. The documentary was no longer just a movie, it was becoming a social tool. While the world reacted, Rafael returned to the surroundings every day, sitting next to the ghost with the same humility as always. Success had not changed what really mattered. The bull was still there, alive, silent, full of presence. And that was enough. Rafael knew that he had crossed a border without a return, not just as an artist, but as a man. Ghost was no longer just the name of a bull. It was the name of a renaissance. Despite the growing success, Rafael noticed a silence from where he expected the most recognition. The old college colleagues, the critics who once flattered him, the national festivals who once celebrated him as a young promise. None of them contacted. No mention, no message, no formal invitation to integrate consecrated shows. It was as if Ghost had touched the people, but bothered by the elite of authorial cinema, the one that values aesthetics before emotion. At first he tried to ignore, but could not avoid the discomfort. Why, among so many sincere compliments of the public, the silence of those who spoke in the name of art weighed so much? Perhaps because there was proof that he had broken the circuit closed with the requirements of language and form. Ghost was raw, no filters, no intellectual choreography. And this, in that world where many pretend depth, was an affront. Rafael realized, then, that this movie was not only a watershed in his career, it was also a rupture with the system. For years, he has tried to please programmers, adapt itineraries to edicts, suffocate his truth to fit in preamble synopses. Now, with a movie made with a single silent character and a bankrupt filmmaker, he had played more hearts than in his entire previous trajectory. And perhaps it was precisely why the invitations did not come. He had proved that it is possible to thrill without permission. Even so, it hurt. We are made of meat, but also of recognition. And as much as he did not admit, Rafael wanted to be seen by his peers. Until one night, as he caressed his head of Ghost, he murmured, "They don't have to invite me. You saw me, and that's enough." The bull raised his eyes for a brief moment, and in that look there was everything: acceptance, presence, and a muddy answer that said, "Some invitations never come because the place is already yours." The call came from a community radio in the interior of Sao Paulo. The reporter was young, with light voice, and said only, "I watched your documentary 3 times. Can I talk to you live?" Rafael hesitative. He had not given interviews for years, and the idea of explaining such an intimate project for strangers made him uncomfortable. But something in the simplicity of the invitation convinced him. Perhaps because it doesn't come from a large portal or famous channel, but from someone who had really been touched by history. The interview was broadcast on Sunday afternoon. Rafael spoke slowly, without pose. He told how he found Ghost, how he began to film unintentionally, to publish anything, as the process transformed him. The reporter listened to him with rare attention. When he mentioned that he did not expect so much repercussion, she responded with respectful silence. Then he asked, "Do you think the bull saved you?" The question disarmed him. It took a few seconds to answer. "Yes. He taught me that healing doesn't have to make noise." The repercussion was immediate. The interview went viral more than he imagined. Excerpts were replicated in the networks with highlighted sentences, especially that sincere response about salvation. Rafael's speech was not a performic. He was visceral, and the public realized that. It was from this interview that other doors opened. Podcasts, educational programs, social projects came to look for him not as the Ghost director, but as someone who dared to listen to silence. For Rafael, the experience was a divider. He understood that, more than a filmmaker, he was now being seen as a mediator between pain and empathy. It was no longer about what he did, but what people felt about seeing. That was new, scary even, but deeply true. And in this place where vanity did not fit, it was beginning to find a new way of existing, being bridged between the invisible and the essential. The popularity of Ghost did not go unnoticed by the activists of the animal cause. In online groups and forums, intense debates about the treatment of animal in confinement, the meat industry, the accomplice silence of the authorities. The documentary was not a pamphletary, but its symbolic power was undeniable. A single, rejected and redeemed bull had become the mirror of a system that would rather maintain its hidden practices. Soon began to circulate hashtags like hashtag #AllArePhantasma and hashtag Vidasquaningwif. Photos of injured animals, mistreatment videos, and complaints began to flood social networks. The name of the documentary was cited in posts of NGOs, veterinarians, agronomy students, and even influencers who had never talked about the subject. The film unintentionally became fuel of a damned indignation. Rafael watched everything with a mix of admiration and fear. He never wanted to turn Ghost into a political flag. His intention was to tell a real, intimate story about pain and overcoming. But now, the audience had assumed the narrative, reinterpreting it as a symbol of resistance. Some more radical groups demanded that he officially position himself. Others accused him of taking advantage of animal suffering. What was pure was now being tensioned by the internet trenches. Instead of reacting, Rafael wrote an open letter. He published on his website with the title, "Neither Hero, No Villain," to someone he heard. In the text, he said that the documentary was about an individual, not about whole systems, but that if the ghost story was serving to open eyes and hearts, he was honored. It was a simple, sincere text, and for that very reason, it has been shared thousands of times. Because deep down, what the world needed most and what Ghost represented, that was just that, someone who was willing to hear even what has no voice. In deepening the research for the documentary, Rafael found that the farm from which Ghost had been removed kept secrets that went beyond the abuse. Among yellowish files and reports from former employees, stories emerged about mysterious disappearances of animals, forgotten land, and lost documents that suggested a covert operation to hide environmental irregularities. Intrigued, Rafael decided to return to the region with basic equipment to record what could. The place was abandoned, taken by the bush and silence. The farm's headquarters was empty, but signs of recent occupation, footprints, remains of food, indicated that someone was still attending the place. The air was heavy, loaded with unlucky secrets. Each step seemed to resonate in the past, as if the earth wanted to tell its own story. On one of the nights, while reviewing images near the makeshift bonfire, Rafael found documents that mentioned counterfeit environmental licenses and the concealment of protected areas. He understood that the problem was not only the suffering of animals, but also the devastation of integer ecosystems. Ghost in that scenario was just a visible victim of a much larger and darker network. The mystery of the old farm gained a central place in the documentary. Rafael knew that exposing it could have consequences, but I felt it needed to be done, because the truth, as painful as it was the only way to give voice not only to Ghost, but to all the forgotten of that earth. And perhaps, in doing so, it could also save many who were yet to come. After the publication of the documentary and the discoveries about the old farm, the repercussion was soon growing. Journalists began to investigate complaints and to press environmental agencies and local authorities. The silence that once covered the irregularities was broken by a series of reports that exposed a web of corruption involving politicians, farmers, and entrepreneurs in the region. Public pressure led to the opening of inquiries and the temporary closing of the farm. Deepened investigations revealed illegal practices such as deforestation, poisoning of rivers, and systematic abuse to animals. Ghost, with its moving history, became the symbol of this struggle for justice, inspiring peaceful manifestations in various cities of the country. Rafael accompanied everything with a mix of pride and apprehension. He knew that his work had surpassed the borders of cinema, becoming an agent of social transformation, but also feared the personal and legal consequences of that exhibition. The repercussion put his life under the spotlight, bringing veiled threats and unexpected pressures. Despite the challenges, he remained firm, aware that the truth had a price, but also an invaluable value. Ghost, the rejected bull, not only survived. Now, it was the voice of many who could not speak. And Rafael knew that his mission was just beginning. The repercussion of the documentary brought an unexpected invitation. A renowned animal rights activist, Mariana Duarte, contacted Rafael. She was impressed not only by the movie's sensitivity, but for the courage to expose such a cruel reality. He proposed a partnership to broaden the impact of the work, uniting art with political and social struggle. Initially, Rafael received the proposal with some suspicion. It came from a world where alliances sometimes seemed opportunistic, and he was afraid the message was misrepresented. However, when talking personally with Mariana, he realized that they shared common values and goals. She did not look for spotlight, but concrete results, and saw in the documentary a starting point for debates and actions. Together, they began organizing lectures, schools, and meetings with non-governmental organizations. The voice of Ghost, through the images and words of Rafael and Mariana, reached various audiences, from young students to parliamentarians. The journey of a rejected bull thus became the flag of a growing movement for ethics and respect. This partnership also transformed Rafael. The previously isolated filmmaker found a new purpose as an activist. He understood that his role went beyond art. It was being an agent of change. And Ghost, with his silent presence, continued to guide this path, like a lighthouse for all who believed in the strength of truth and empathy. The unexpected success of the documentary led Rafael and Ghost to places he had never imagined. Independent film festivals around the country began to invite him to show the film. And surprisingly, the work began to accumulate awards that valued the sincerity